Oh, good.
Working. Lecture is on heart disease, and I'd actually rather talk about heart health, but most people are in this disease mode. But my plan is to make everybody's heart healthy. I have kind of an interesting story to start with. I was born unwanted. My mother and father were getting divorced when I was in the uterus, and they were going through all kinds of stuff, and I received a lot of negative energy when I was young, and I wasn't wanted or loved when I was born. And every time my mom looked at me, I reminded her of her husband who had cheated on her, and so because I looked like him, and she sent negative energy towards me first 5 years of my life. And by the time I was 5 years old, I'd had rheumatic heart disease from an untreated strep infection. And she took me to a specialist, a heart specialist, who said, well, he's got 2 bad valves, we can put pig valves in. And all I heard was pig valves, as a 5-year-old. And he said that I'd probably, if I survived long enough, by the time I was 10 years old, I should get my valves replaced. And so, as a little kid, I was like, oh, this is cool. I'll have pig valves in my heart, And we were so poor, we never went back to the doctor, so I had this heart disease hanging over me, from the time I was just a little kid. And by the time my mom remarried and I got involved in sports, every time I'd go to the doctor, they'd listen to my heart and say, oh, you really shouldn't be doing sports. Your heart's enlarged and you've got bad valves and this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, let me play anyway. And so they would. And so I became athletic. I had this enlarged heart with bad valves. Ended up going on a mission, and they restricted me to go into a mission in the United States because I wanted to go foreign. But I had this bad heart. They always call it a bad heart, enlarged heart. And so this was weighing on me, the whole time. And then I had came back from my mission, and I had an experience where I knew I was supposed to go to medical school. So I applied and got in, and everybody at the medical school loved listening to my heart because they could hear all these heart valve problems. They could feel that it was enlarged, all these different things. And so, I still had this supposed bad heart, and yet I tried to be very forward-thinking, tried to love myself, all kinds of things. And then about 12 years ago, I was told by Spirit that I needed to climb this mountain in Yosemite National Park, and that something special was going to happen to me there. And in the meantime, I knew I was supposed to get divorced from my wife because she wasn't really supporting my heart. She was more interested in the money that I made than in loving me and being kind to me and all of this. And so I made this trip there to kind of talk with her about going through a divorce and go on this hike. And so anyway, we start hiking up Half Dome. How many know what Half Dome looks like? It's in Yosemite National Park. It's this huge rock boulder that sticks up out of the ground, and half of it has been fallen off, and so it's a half of a dome. And it's about a mile off the floor of the valley, about 6,000 feet above, a little more than a mile. And it's just this massive, huge thing. And I was hiking up with a friend that was a formerly had worked down at the LA Sheriff's Office, and he was a EMT, emergency medical technician, And we start hiking up this mountain, and I've got my daughter and my son with me, and he's got 2 of his sons with him. And we're going up this mountain, and I get about 2 miles from the top of the mountain, and literally I start having a heart attack. My chest just starts hurting, my left arm goes numb, I can't walk, I can't breathe, and Jim Hignite, who was with me at the time, he goes, "Scott, you better lay down, you're having a heart attack." And he says, "I'll go up the top of the mountain. There's always a forest ranger, a national parks ranger up there, and we'll send for a helicopter to come get you." Well, so he and my son and his 2 sons headed up the mountain, and my daughter stayed with me. And my daughter said that the next thing I did was lay on the ground. I turned purple and stopped breathing. And what was fascinating about that was I didn't think anything major was wrong. But the Spirit said to me, "Scott, you need to let go." And I'm like, let go of what? And the Spirit said, "You need to let go of your wife and get divorced." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm working on that." And the Spirit said, "No, you need to energetically let go of all the energy. You need to disconnect because you're giving your wife too much of your energy." And I'm like, "That's okay. I love her, and you know, I'm going through this divorce because I know I'm supposed to progress, and I know that she's keeping me from progressing." And Spirit says, "No, she's going to kill you if you don't take back your energy." And I'm like, "Well, okay." And I argued with the Spirit for what seemed like 15 minutes in my mind, and finally decided, okay, what do I do? And the Spirit said, "Take back your energy." I said, "How do I do that?" And the Spirit said, "All you do is you command your energy to come back to you." And so I did that. I said, I command all my energy to come back to me. And all of a sudden, my daughter said, I sat up, you know, and looked great. My color was good. I was pink and breathing good. My legs started working again. And literally, we went full speed up this mountain. And what's interesting about Half Dome, it's a dome. And the first part coming up on the top, you literally have to pull yourself up with your arms and your legs, or you just don't make it. And so I'm literally grabbing these cables, pulling myself up, and I have tons of energy. I haven't had this much energy in years. And I get the top, and almost to the top, and my friend's coming down, and he looks down at me and he says, "Scott, how the hell did you get up here?" And I'm like, "Go up and tell him not to send the helicopter. I feel great." And he's like, he just shakes his head and he heads back up. But anyway, what happened that day was fascinating. My heart healed. I don't have any murmurs anymore. It's not enlarged anymore. And literally, I had a change of heart. Literally. Got a brand new heart. It was a miracle. Now, that's not going to happen to everybody, although I've seen it happen. And I know what that energy feels like. And I've had a lot of people come to me with heart problems, and I've been able to give them the energy of a perfect heart. Now, when we talk about this, it's fascinating. Fear and other emotions are what cause heart disease. You know, growing up, I was always, you know, oh geez, I got a bad heart, I'm probably going to die anyway. And so when I was playing sports, you know, I didn't care. I figured if I died out on the field, at least I'd be happy, you know. And so I got to the point where fear wasn't a factor, but fear causes damage, especially to our heart, because it's the opposite of love, believe it or not. And so being in fear, guess what the leading cause of death in the United States is? Anybody? Heart disease. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. Not in the world, not in the rest of the world, but it is here. And it still is. Number 2 is cancer. But guess what? Cancer might take the number 1 spot either this year or next year. And then the third major cause is going to your doctor and getting treatment or iatrogenic disease. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, fear really affects the heart, it affects the solar plexus, it affects our digestive issues, it affects our thymus gland, which is in the heart chakra. The thymus gland is our main gland that produces the antibodies and the antigens against diseases, and fear affects that. It also affects our elimination and processing of waste and our ability to deal with stress. Other emotions that affect the heart in a negative way, stress, is a major disease to the heart. It also affects the kidneys and the adrenal glands and affects our ability to ground to the earth. And when we have mineral loss, which 90% of Americans have a problem with getting enough minerals in our body because we're losing them because of stress, cortisol, all these issues. And it affects our heart because we need to have good electrolytes in our heart for the function, because our heart's constantly beating. It's a muscle that never stops. And so stress affects our heart. Throat and upper respiratory diseases affect the heart, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The brain and higher functioning nerves also affect the heart nerves, believe it or not. If your hearing's being affected, your heart nerves being affected. If your eyes are being affected, your heart nerves being affected. So the heart, thymus, and lungs are all in that main chakra. Atypical bacteria have they're bacteria that aren't typical because they don't live in the blood. They actually live inside of cells, and they have to have a way to get into the cells. And they've found that atypical bacterial infections are getting more and more common. One of the most common is called chlamydia. And chlamydia is also a sexually transmitted disease. And the incidence went way, way up when we started having more oral sex and stuff, because it would enter through our mouths instead of just the sexual organs. And so, a huge problem. Another one is mycoplasma and mycobacteria. And they cause inflammation in the internal level of the blood vessels, the internal layer called the intima, and cause blocking, cause plaque buildup, and that sort of thing. And actually they found that the cholesterol is a reaction to the inflammation and isn't the cause of the heart disease. The cause of heart disease is these atypical bacteria that get into the intima, cause inflammation, and then the body brings in cholesterol to hopefully repair it, and it doesn't do it. So these bacterial infections are really hard. Now, when I was young, my heart disease was caused by streptococcus. And a lot of people who are getting blood infections with staph, especially the MRSA, it's affecting the heart. The mycoplasma and chlamydia are causing a huge problem with heart disease. And here's a belief system. A lot of these people are out having sex. They get chlamydia because they're not having sex for love. They're having sex because of base desires and lack of love, and they're not doing it for the love. They're doing it for sex. And so when you have sex without love, it causes heart disease. This is one of the things that proved that. So anyway, H. pylori, which is a big thing that causes reflux and esophageal cancer, stomach problems. They found that the reflux and everything, when that starts happening, you've usually got this H. pylori, and they're finding H. pylori is another atypical bacteria that's causing heart disease. So, and they're intracellular bacterial infections. They're part bacteria, part viral. and they move into the blood vessels in the liver, the pancreas, the lungs, and the heart, and they cause all kinds of diseases and problems. Atypical pneumonia is associated with coronary heart disease. They came out with a study that they did 2,223 adults initially free from cardiovascular disease. They got atypical pneumonia, and about 76% of them ended up positive for coronary artery disease, and they didn't have it before. So quite interesting that damaged. Another study showed a link between the atypical bacteria and the coronary artery disease, chlamydia pneumonia, and they call it pneumonia because they find it in the lungs, but it's actually the same chlamydia that causes sexually transmitted diseases. They found that it bound to the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels and cause damage and plaque buildup. And so, fascinating thing. Now let's talk about the treatments, because we know we have a huge problem because it's the #1 cause of disease. They found that vitamin D protects the endothelial cells lining the blood vessels, reduces inflammation that can cause damage to the blood vessels, increases nitric oxide, which decreases blood pressure, and other chemicals which relax blood vessels. So, in essence, vitamin D is essential to reduce heart disease. So if you're not getting vitamin D, you should be, and most Americans are deficient. We don't get enough sunlight, and when we do go out in the sun, we put sunscreens on because that's what the dermatologists has put us into fear, believing that the sun's bad for us. Now, sunburn is bad because it causes damage. But if you get out in the sun and just slowly get more and more sun, and you tan, you don't burn yourself, it's actually very, very good for you. Now, the role of vitamin D in preventing atherosclerosis. Vascular smooth muscle cells line the blood vessels, grow and migrate into the inner wall of blood vessels during atherosclerosis. Vitamin D blocks this vascular migration and keeps the cells where they're supposed to be. Vitamin D also improves the relaxation through the production of more nitrous oxide and aids in repair of the stressed smooth muscle cells. Vitamin D has been shown to have activity of the enzyme telomerase that stops DNA from unwinding in these cells. So in other words, it makes the cells last longer.
Is that different than vitamin D3, or is it the same?
When I'm talking about vitamin D, it's D1, D2, D3. And so we're talking generally about all three of them. D3 is the most active. We convert cholesterol in our blood vessels and in our skin to D1, cholecalciferol. And that D1 gets in the blood, goes to our liver, gets converted to D2, dicholecalciferol. And then it goes into our kidneys and gets converted to D3. And if our liver or our kidneys are not functioning well, it doesn't get converted. D1 isn't as active in these things. D3 is the most active. D2 is sort of active. So it's best to take D3 if you're taking a supplement. And because most of us are not producing enough D1, and we're not converting it into D2 because a lot of our livers are congested and toxic. And then our kidneys are failing because we're taking too many non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications from the pharmacies and doctors. And so it's blocking the conversion to D3. And so all of us are deficient in D3. I mean, I'm even deficient. I don't take enough. And I was told this morning, start taking more D3. It's darker, you're not getting enough sunlight.
And what is the volume to take? How much to take?
I recommend to people to take at least 5,000 units if you're depleted every day, because it takes that much, because a lot of our microbiomes have been altered and we don't absorb it as well as we should either. So taking at least 5,000 units a day is really good. Now I'm going to talk about a product that has both vitamin D and K2, And I found it's a marvelous product because it's got herbs that actually help us absorb it into our body. And but I'll talk about